Biology isn't a lease.
Surprises are a strange currency in life. They can feel like the jackpot of human experience, or they can gut you so completely that you wonder why you ever believed in them at all. I discovered this truth the brutal way, by trying to play the role of a devoted husband with one grand gesture. I thought I'd pull off a romantic surprise for my wife. Instead, I walked straight into a nightmare. By profession, I'm a supply chain analyst, which essentially means I spend half my existence in hotels that reek of bleach and industrial-grade disinfectant, and the other half explaining to impatient executives why their products aren't arriving as though transported by magic. My most recent contract had stranded me in Thailand for nearly 2 months, sweating through monsoon heat, surviving on fried street food, and clinging to video calls with Sarah, my wife of 4 years, as my lifeline. The plan had always been to stay 1 more week, but when business wrapped up early, I thought I'd elevate my status as husband of the year by flying home ahead of schedule. I imagined every detail of the reunion. Me arriving at the door with duty-free chocolates in hand, Sarah's eyes lighting up as she ran into my arms, maybe even a cinematic tear or two. It was supposed to be a moment carved out of romance. Instead, the cab from Logan Airport rolled me up to our house in Brookline around 6 o'clock on a Tuesday evening, and the scene waiting for me looked more like the set of a reality show I hadn't agreed to star in. Cars lined the driveway and spilled into the street. Sleek BMWs, shiny Mercedes, the kind of machines that made my Honda Civic look like a rusted lawnmower. Balloons in pink and blue bobbed in the air, tied to every railing and mailbox, and a banner stretched proudly across our porch, "Welcome our little miracle." I froze on the sidewalk, suitcase handle tight in my fist. Sarah and I had tossed around the idea of kids before, sure, but during all our calls, twice a week like clockwork, she hadn't breathed a word about being pregnant. Through the living room window, I saw a full-blown party underway. Neighbors, Sarah's colleagues, familiar faces I hadn't seen in months were sipping champagne and crowding around the star of the show, my wife. She was radiant, undeniably pregnant, glowing as though she were on the cover of some maternity magazine. But the glow wasn't the worst part. The worst part was seeing Tommy Rodriguez, my college roommate, the best man at our wedding, and the perpetual house guest who'd been living off my couch for 6 months, standing beside her. His hands rested on her belly with the possessive comfort of a man who thought he belonged there. I told the driver to keep the change and let him pull away. Leaving my suitcase abandoned at the gate, I walked toward my own front door like an uninvited guest. The door was cracked, the music spilling out, and nobody noticed me slip inside at first. The atmosphere inside was thick with laughter, clinking glasses, and toasts to the future. People were celebrating a life I hadn't even been consulted about. Sarah sparkled at the center of it all, Tommy planted firmly at her side. My parents were there too, smiling warmly, as though everything about this grotesque tableau was perfectly normal. My mother's face gave it away first. Her glass of champagne halted midair as her expression froze in shock. My father turned next, the laughter catching in his throat, and it hit me like a thunderclap. They all knew. Every single person in that room had been let in on the secret except me. I cut through the chatter like a blade, walking straight toward Sarah and Tommy. The room fell into silence so sharp it might as well have shattered glass. Sarah's complexion drained to ash, her mouth working soundlessly, while Tommy stared at me like he couldn't quite connect the dots. "Hey man," he finally said, casual as if we were still 20 and late for class. "Didn't expect you back yet. Thought you were gone another week." I turned from him to Sarah, then back again, my wife, my best friend, staged in my living room, cradling a pregnancy that couldn't possibly belong to me. "How long?" I asked, my voice low. Sarah wavered, lips trembling, unable to form words. Tommy shifted in front of her, protective, or maybe just arrogant enough to think he had the right. "How long, Sarah?" I repeated, calm in a way that scared even me. No answer, only silence that stretched so far it swallowed the air from the room. Betrayal, I realized, isn't cinematic like the movies make it. There's no explosion of music or thunderclap of rage. It's quieter, crueler, like drowning in plain sight while everyone else holds their breath. I turned and walked away, through the wall of silent faces, out the front door into the cool evening air. Let them stew in their cowardice. Sarah rushed after me, her swollen belly slowing her down. "Wait, please, just wait!" "I can explain everything." I spun back, bitter laughter escaping me. Explain? Oh, I'd love to hear this one. Tell me how you managed to get pregnant by my best friend while I was halfway around the world earning the money that keeps this roof over your head. She flinched, arms circling her stomach like a shield. I was lonely, she whispered. Lonely, I repeated, the word sour on my tongue. So your cure for loneliness was screwing the guy sleeping on our couch and raiding our fridge? It wasn't like that, she stammered, her voice cracking. It just happened. I never meant for it to go this far. When? I demanded. Her eyes dropped to the ground. Maybe 3 months ago. 4. I can't even remember anymore. 3 months ago. Right when I'd boarded that plane. Right when I was telling her, on video calls, how much I missed her. And then Tommy stepped in, puffed up with false courage. Hey, man, let's not do this in the street. We can sit down, talk this through like adults. I turned my glare on him. The man I'd lent money to more times than I could count, who hadn't held down a job in nearly a year, who was standing in front of me now like he had any claim to my life. You've got 10 seconds, I said evenly, to say something that doesn't make me want to break your jaw. He raised his hands, feigning peace. Look, I know it looks bad, but I didn't want you to find out like this. Sarah and we just connected on another level. It wasn't planned. Stop, I cut him off sharply. Just shut your mouth before I do something I'll regret. I glanced between them, my wife, my so-called friend, standing there together like they were sufferers of some tragic fate instead of the architects of my humiliation. You know what? I finally said, pulling out my car keys. You two deserve each other. With that, I slid into my beat-up Honda and drove away, leaving them planted in front of the house I'd spent years paying for. That night, I checked into a roadside motel, the kind decorated in mismatched patterns that clashed so badly it almost hurt to look at. But for the first time in months, the space was mine, just mine. No lies, no betrayal, no surprises waiting to hollow me out again. By the time the sun crept through the blinds the next morning, my path was crystal clear. Sleep hadn't given me rest, only clarity. There was no room left for hesitation, no space for nostalgia. The betrayal had cut too deep, and now it was my turn to carve the future. Step 1 was obvious. Marcus Chen. If divorce attorneys came with spirit animals, his would be a great white shark in a tailored suit. Marcus and I went back to our college days, and while most people grew out of their quirks, his were forged into weapons. The man actually enjoyed parsing fine print, thrived on dismantling contracts word by word, and treated telemarketers like sparring partners until they gave up. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was a precision instrument of destruction, exactly what I needed. When I walked into his office, Marcus didn't even bother with pleasantries. He glanced up from his desk, smirked, and said, "Christ, you look like roadkill. What the hell happened to you?" I unloaded the entire story, from the surprise homecoming to the grotesque baby shower starring my wife and my former best friend. Marcus didn't interrupt. He just listened, pen gliding across his notepad in neat surgical strokes that seemed designed to terrify opposing counsel. When I finally ran out of words, he leaned back, cracked his knuckles, and grinned like a hunter that had just scented blood. All right, let's talk strategy. Let's talk about how we dismantle these people. The house, he began, flipping open a fresh page. Mine, I said flatly. Every inch. Bought it 2 years before the wedding, deed, mortgage, my name only. He raised an eyebrow. Bank accounts? Joint accounts exist, I admitted, but everything, checking, savings, cards, was set up under my name. She had garbage credit, so I handled all of it. Marcus's grin widened. Beautiful. We'll freeze those accounts immediately before she gets any bright ideas about funding her new romance with your paycheck. And just like that, the machine roared into motion. Within an hour, I was drowning in signatures, documents for asset protection, emergency freezes, and preemptive countermeasures. It felt like signing treaties in the middle of a war, except this war had already started, and I was done being the pacifist. Here's how this plays out, Marcus said, sliding the final packet across the desk. By this evening, Sarah won't be able to touch a cent. The house remains untouchable, yours beyond argument. If she wants to fight it, she'll have to prove she contributed something to the marriage besides infidelity. And Tommy? I asked, savoring the name like poison. Oh, we're going to have fun with Tommy, Marcus replied, his eyes glinting. He's been squatting rent-free for 8 months with no lease. Legally speaking, he's a guest who's overstayed his welcome. We'll serve him papers so fast he won't know whether to pack a bag or call his mother. He'll be out before he figures out how to spell eviction. The warning came as I left his office. Expect retaliation. Marcus reminded me that Sarah would try every tactic: tears, guilt, threats, empty promises. I told him I was beyond persuasion. By noon, the storm began. My phone buzzed with calls from Sarah, then Tommy, then Sarah again, followed by a flood of texts and voicemails filled with the predictable chorus. We need to talk. You don't understand. We can explain. I didn't read a word. Every message went straight to Marcus with the subject line: evidence of maltreatment. Use liberally. At precisely 3:47 p.m., the hammer fell. Sarah's debit card declined. My phone lit up with panicked calls, but all she discovered was that her access to my accounts had been surgically severed. Her shrill fury came through in the voicemails. Anger at first, accusations about how vindictive I was being, followed quickly by tears and begging. By message 5, her tone shifted into desperation. Promises to work it out, to fix this. Tommy's approach was different, predictably pathetic. His messages dripped with faux reason. Bro, I know you're pissed, but this eviction is insane. I've been living here 8 months. Call me back and let's figure this out like men. Like men. That phrase from him nearly made me laugh out loud. The same man who had been eating my food, sleeping under my roof, and betraying me with my wife, now wanted to negotiate like men. Through my unofficial intelligence network, mostly Jake Martinez, who'd worked with Tommy before his firing, I kept track of the happy couples unraveling. Jake ran into him at a dive bar downtown, and the report was delicious. Guy looked wrecked, Jake told me over a beer. Smelled like his breakfast came straight from a liquor bottle. Kept whining about how unreasonable you were. Even asked to crash on my couch. I told him everyone knew what he did, and no one wanted the stink of it near them. The eviction notice gave Tommy 30 days. Desperation quickly set in. He burned through his contacts like wildfire. Old friends, estranged relatives, even social media. His Facebook post was a comedy classic. Looking for a temporary place to stay while I transition. Clean, quiet, responsible tenant. References available. The internet delivered its verdict in record time. Comment after comment, mocking him, calling him out, laughing until he pulled the post within hours. Screenshots, of course, made sure his humiliation lived forever. By week 3, his mask had completely slipped. I spotted him at the coffee shop where I'd set up my laptop to work. Gone was the smug, self-assured man who had played house in my living room. In his place sat a hollow-eyed wreck, clothes wrinkled, hair greasy, the look of someone living on gas station snacks and sleeping in the back seat of a car. He shuffled toward me like a condemned man. Mind if I sit? He asked softly, gesturing to the empty chair. I didn't bother looking up right away. Free country, I muttered. At least for people who aren't about to be thrown out. He collapsed into the seat. Look, I know you're furious. Furious? I finally met his eyes, letting the weight of my contempt land. Tommy, what I feel for you doesn't fit into the English language. They'd need to invent whole new words to capture it. His hands shook as he tried to steady himself. I need help, man. I don't have anywhere to go. Not my problem. We were friends for 15 years, he pleaded. Doesn't that count for anything? I shut my laptop and studied him like a bug pinned under glass. 15 years of friendship, and you traded it for a few months of sneaking around with my wife. Tell me, was it worth it? His face flushed red before the defeat settled in. I'm living in my car, he whispered. I've got 6 days before the sheriff shows up, and then I've got nothing. I sipped my coffee, slow and deliberate, savoring the moment. It was sweeter than any revenge fantasy I'd ever conjured. 6 days, I repeated, nodding thoughtfully. That's not much time at all. His eyes flickered with hope. Well, I said, standing and slinging my bag over my shoulder. Good luck with that. And I walked away, leaving him there, drowning in the ruins of the life he'd built on my betrayal. Eviction day arrived draped in perfect irony. A flawless November Tuesday, crisp air, sunlight spilling across the street, as though mocking the wreckage it was about to illuminate. I parked across from the house at 9:45 a.m., 15 minutes ahead of the scheduled showdown. Call me vindictive, but there was no universe where I'd miss front-row seats to this performance. At exactly 10 a.m., a black and white cruiser rolled up, punctual as a judge's gavel. Out stepped Sheriff Williams, a man carved from granite and authority. He looked like he'd once played linebacker and kept the build to prove it. His thick mustache gave him the air of someone who had heard every excuse under the sun and dismissed them all with the same weary disdain. Sarah opened the door, She looked wrecked, eyes swollen from weeks of crying, hair scraped back into a messy ponytail, yoga pants sagging like they hadn't been washed in days. Behind her lurked Tommy, gaunt and jittery, the weight of stress having shaved at least 20 pounds off his frame. Gone was the smug pretender from the baby shower. In his place stood a scarecrow hollowed out by consequences. "Ma'am," Williams began in a voice that was more proclamation than greeting, "I'm here to carry out an eviction notice for one Tommy Rodriguez. Is Mr. Rodriguez present?" Tommy shuffled forward, his voice straining for calm but cracking at the edges. "Officer, there's been a mistake. I've been living here for 9 months. This is my residence." The sheriff consulted his clipboard with the detached patience of a man who had processed the same line 10,000 times before breakfast. "Sir, according to legal documents, you are a guest who has overstayed his welcome in a property owned by David Chen. You were given 30 days to vacate and have failed to comply. Today, you leave." Tommy's voice pitched higher, desperate. "But I live here. My mail comes here. I've been buying groceries." Williams cut him off like he was swatting a fly. "Sir, without a lease agreement or documented tenancy, you are trespassing. You have 15 minutes to collect essentials and vacate." Sarah jumped in, her tone sharp and hysterical. "This is outrageous. He's the father of my child. You can't just throw him into the street." Williams turned his gaze on her, expression immovable. "Ma'am, biology isn't a legal defense. Paternity does not equal tenancy. If Mr. Rodriguez wants to contest the eviction, he can file through the courts. But today, he leaves." Tommy started pacing, jaw tight, panic bleeding through the cracks. Then his eyes caught me across the street. He froze, and in a single moment, his expression cycled through anger, guilt, rage, and despair. "David!" he shouted, voice carrying across the quiet neighborhood like a drowning man begging for a lifeline. "Come on, man, don't do this. We can work something out." I rolled my window down and leaned out casually, grinning like I had all the time in the world. "Sorry, Tommy. Can't hear you over the sound of justice echoing down the block." It hit him like a capital punishment. His shoulders sagged, his face fell apart. He spun to Sarah, searching for salvation. But she was frozen on the porch, arms wrapped around her belly, unable or unwilling to save him. "This is all your fault," Tommy spat at her, bitterness dripping. "If you hadn't insisted on that stupid baby shower, none of this would have happened." "My fault?" Sarah's voice shot up like glass breaking. "You're the one who couldn't keep it in your pants. You ruined everything, Tommy." Sheriff Williams cleared his throat loudly, unimpressed. 10 minutes left. Save the relationship counseling for somewhere else." 8 minutes later, Tommy stumbled out with 2 duffel bags and a battered cardboard box, the sum of his life crammed into what he could carry. He loaded it into his rusted Ford, the engine coughing on the 3rd attempt before sputtering to life. He gave Sarah one last look, rolled down his window, and yelled, "Good luck explaining this to your parents!" Then he peeled out of the driveway like a criminal on the run. Sarah collapsed onto the porch, tears pouring as her sobs echoed down the street. Sheriff Williams gave her a look that was almost pity. "Ma'am, consider alternative housing. This property legally belongs to Mr. Chen." Her gaze found me across the road. For a moment, the world shrank to the silence between us. Her eyes were swollen pools of regret, desperation, and the crushing recognition that she had traded a secure life for a man who abandoned her at the first sign of consequence. I offered her a small wave, shifted into gear, and drove away, leaving her with the ruin she had built. 3 weeks later, I was drinking espresso in a downtown loft with exposed brick, high ceilings, and not a single memory of betrayal etched into the walls. My intel network, which really meant Jake Martinez keeping his ear to the ground, kept me updated on the comedy of errors unfolding in their lives. Tommy had been unemployed for nearly a year and thought job hunting meant sending resumes to companies that wouldn't hire him in 1,000 lifetimes. Word was he'd been holed up at a Motel 6 by the highway, paying weekly rates like a drifter. Sarah had tried to move in with him, but according to Jake's sources, she lasted exactly one night before retreating to her parents' house. Her father nearly threw her out too, and it took her mother begging him down from the ledge to keep her there. 2 months later, my phone lit up with a text from an unfamiliar number. "This is Lisa Walsh, Sarah's sister. Thought you should know she dumped Tommy last week. Figured you'd like that." I called Lisa immediately. She was the family gossip, and at that moment, I was her most captive audience. "Sarah finally woke up," Lisa told me, voice dripping with satisfaction. "She realized without your paycheck, Tommy had nothing. He couldn't support her or the baby, The last straw was when he asked her to cover his motel bill. She walked out. I laughed out loud, the irony too perfect. Sarah had detonated our marriage, chasing the illusion of companionship, only to end up with a man who couldn't even pay for his own bed. And here's the kicker, Lisa added. When she left, Tommy had the nerve to tell her she was being unrealistic. He said real relationships take sacrifice and loyalty. That man who betrayed you, who lived off you, who abandoned her the second life got tough, lectured her on commitment. The hypocrisy was so rich, it deserved its own monument. 8 months later, I was standing in an airport cafe, coffee in hand before a flight to Singapore. Life was golden. I'd lost 15 pounds, picked up a tan in Costa Rica, and wore a watch that cost more than Tommy made in a good month back when he had a job. And then through the window, I saw her, Sarah. She was pushing a stroller down the sidewalk, her gait heavy and defeated. She didn't look like the vibrant woman I had once married. She looked hollow, worn out. Not the endearing fatigue of new motherhood, but exhaustion etched into her very soul. The baby, maybe 4 months old, was bundled in hand-me-down clothes. Sarah wore the same stretched yoga pants and a coat, trying, and failing, to conceal the weight she'd never lost. When Tommy finally stumbled into view, he looked less like a man and more like a wreck dragged out of the gutter. His clothes were wrinkled, his face hollow, and his body carried the exhausted slump of someone who had been sleeping in the back seat of a car for months. He muttered to Sarah, his gestures sharp and pleading, while she stood there looking drained, shaking her head as though every word he spoke was one more burden she couldn't carry. I couldn't hear them through the glass, but I didn't need to. It was obvious he was begging for money, begging for another chance, begging for anything, and she had nothing left to give. Then Sarah's gaze lifted. Her eyes locked onto mine through the cafe window. For 3 eternal seconds, the world went silent. I saw it all in that fleeting glance, regret gnawing at her, shame etched across her features, and the crushing awareness that she had thrown away the best life she would ever know for a man too broke to buy diapers for his own child. I raised my coffee cup in a mock toast, smiling wide enough to make sure she saw it. The moment my grin reached her, her face crumbled. I didn't linger. I slipped out the back exit, not because I was running, but because I had somewhere far more important to be. Catching a plane, moving forward, living the life she'd forfeited. But the true satisfaction didn't come that day. It came a 1.5 years later, on a business trip to Seattle. I was staying at the Four Seasons, my suite paid for by a client who valued good work and wasn't shy about rewarding it. That evening, I went down to the hotel bar, ordered a glass of top-shelf whiskey, and ran into someone I hadn't seen in years, Rebecca Martinez, my old neighbor from 3 houses down back when Sarah and I played the part of a happy couple. "David, oh my God, you look incredible," Rebecca said, her surprise genuine. "I heard about, well, everything. I'm so sorry you had to go through that." We ended up talking for more than an hour. Rebecca had always had her finger on the pulse of the neighborhood, and the gossip she brought to the table that night was richer than anything streaming on Netflix. "You know Sarah's parents sold their house, right?" she said, swirling the amber liquid in her glass. "Patricia claims it was to downsize, but everyone knows the truth. Tom couldn't handle the humiliation. He was so ashamed he took early retirement. The whispers never stopped, so they packed up and left." She leaned in, lowering her voice. "They're social outcasts now. Country club membership revoked, dinner parties dried up, and even their church group gave them the cold shoulder." I let out a low laugh. Karma had a long reach, and apparently it hadn't stopped with Sarah and Tommy. "And Tommy?" I asked, half dreading the answer but unable to resist. Rebecca's expression soured. "Last I heard, he's working at a debt collection call center in Malden. They pay minimum wage and chew through employees like cheap gum. Word is his own mother doesn't even speak to him anymore. She told someone at church she didn't raise a son to be a homewrecker." The image that conjured nearly made me choke on my drink. Tommy Rodriguez, once full of swagger about his college potential, now reduced to spending his days getting screamed at by people who couldn't pay their bills. It was poetic. Rebecca wasn't done. Her eyes lit up with the best piece of the story. "Here's the craziest part. Sarah tried to find you. About 6 months ago, she went to your old office building, pestering security, asking if they knew how to reach you. When that failed, she started calling your former co-workers, practically begging for your number. A chill ran through me. Please tell me nobody actually gave it to her. Rebecca shook her head emphatically. Are you kidding? After what she pulled? Everyone thought she was delusional. Jenny from your old department told me Sarah was a wreck, crying, saying she made a mistake, talking about how the baby needed a father figure. Pathetic. I shook my head, stunned at the audacity. After everything, Sarah still believed she could just waltz back into my life and reset the clock. And get this, Rebecca continued, leaning closer like she couldn't wait to spill the last drop. She even hired a private investigator. My cousin works at a law firm and heard about it through their gossip mill. Sarah spent her last scraps of savings on the guy, but he gave up after 2 weeks. Said you covered your tracks too well. I smiled into my glass. He wasn't wrong. After the divorce, I had rebuilt myself from the ground up. I'd added my mother's maiden name to my own, becoming David Chen Mitchell in my professional world. New number, new address, new identity. The PI had been chasing shadows. When I finally went back to my suite that night, I stood at the window, 32 stories above Seattle, and looked down at the city lights. The realization hit me like a revelation. I hadn't just survived betrayal. I had transcended it. The life I'd rebuilt wasn't just better than what I'd lost. It was better than anything I had once imagined possible. In the 2 years since my marriage had imploded, I had traveled to 17 countries. My consulting business was thriving so much I could pick and choose my clients. I was living in a penthouse in Boston's financial district, my savings account a fortress of security, and I carried no baggage tied to people who had proven themselves unworthy of trust. But the biggest change wasn't material. It was internal. I had learned to value myself in ways I never had before. No more bending my principles to avoid arguments. No more silencing my instincts when something felt off. No more tolerating less than I deserved just because it was easier than conflict. The dating world had become a new landscape, one I navigated with a confidence born from fire. Once you've survived the worst betrayal, you stop fearing rejection. You learn to spot red flags before they turn into disasters, and you're not afraid to walk away the second something feels wrong. I'd had relationships since the divorce, real ones, with women who valued honesty, who had their own successful lives, who understood that trust wasn't automatic, it was earned. I hadn't remarried, but that was by choice, not circumstance. I wasn't interested in another legal contract until I knew beyond doubt the person across from me carried the strength and integrity to honor it. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sarah's betrayal, the thing that once felt like the death of my world, had in fact been the catalyst that freed me. If she had been a better liar, if she had hidden the affair more carefully, I might have wasted decades in a marriage that hollowed me out. Instead, her failure at deception set me free. Free to build a life where every commitment was mutual, every relationship chosen, and every success was mine alone. A life that was no longer defined by betrayal but by resilience, clarity, and the absolute refusal to ever accept less than what I deserved. Half a year passed before word of Sarah drifted back to me, carried on the casual breeze of a mutual friend's gossip. The news was almost too perfect. She was working part-time at Target, punching a clock for minimum wage while living in the unfinished basement of her parents' house. I laughed when I heard it. Loud, unrestrained laughter that nearly brought tears to my eyes. Not the cruel cackle of spite, but the relieved, triumphant laugh of someone who had sidestepped disaster so completely that the bullet meant for me had ricocheted and struck the shooter instead. The same friend told me that Tommy had managed to sink even lower. He'd been arrested for drunk driving. His mugshot splashed online like a warning label for bad decisions. Unsurprisingly, the arrest cost him the one pitiful job he'd managed to hold on to, the call center gig where he was already drowning. Word was, he'd been haunting cheap bars, drowning himself in whiskey, cornering strangers with slurred speeches about how his life had been ruined by me, the supposedly unforgiving friend who couldn't overlook what he called a simple mistake. A simple mistake. That phrase stuck in my head, so absurd it was almost comical. The months of deceit, the calculated betrayal, the secret affair that unraveled an entire marriage, all of it reduced in Tommy's self-serving mythology to nothing more than a slip-up. That's the hallmark of people like him. And like Sarah, too. Accountability is a language they never learned. In their stories, they are always the misunderstood sufferers, crushed under the weight of cruel circumstance, with someone else to blame for every consequence. Responsibility never lands at their feet. It always belongs to anyone but them. Meanwhile, while they wallowed in the ruins they built with their own hands, I was charting an entirely different trajectory. The very week I heard the news, I was booking a first-class seat to Tokyo for a corporate consultation that promised to pay me more in a few days than Tommy could scrape together in a year, even if he ever managed to hold down a real job again. The contrast was staggering. They were stuck clawing through the wreckage of their poor choices, and I was ascending into a life that their betrayal had accidentally set me free to build. The truth is, not every story of betrayal ends in fiery confrontation or tear-streaked reconciliations. More often, the endings are quieter, but infinitely more powerful. Sometimes the conclusion is simply this: you thrive, while those who tried to destroy you collapse under the weight of their own decisions. Karma doesn't need you to lift a finger. It works patiently, steadily, with perfect timing. And in those moments, you realize that the sweetest form of revenge isn't revenge at all. It's constructing a life so fulfilling, so prosperous, so far beyond what you once had, that you feel an odd kind of gratitude toward the betrayal that forced you onto this better path. That's the final twist, the irony no scriptwriter could improve. The people who tried to bury you end up burying themselves, and you walk away lighter, stronger, untouchable. And honestly, that is the most satisfying ending any story could possibly have.